Welcome to Heart of Texas Histories and Mysteries. I'm your host, Em, coming to you from deep in the heart of Texas. Today, I'll be shifting gears and moving away from the more sinister subject matter of the previous two episodes. In this episode, I'll be telling you the story of a celebrated Texas historian and preservationist, Adina De Zavala. Let's get into it. Adina Emilia De Zavala was born in Harris County on November 28, 1861. She was the oldest of the 6 children of Julia Tyrrell De Zavala, a native of Ireland, and Augustine De Zavala, a rancher or farmer according to some sources, who joined the Confederate Navy when the Civil War broke out. Augustine was born in New York, but his father, Lorenzo, had been a very influential figure in the creation of the Republic of Texas. Born into a Basque family in Yucatan while Mexico was still under Spanish rule, Lorenzo de Zavala was a strong proponent of representative government who helped draft the Constitution of the First Federal Republic of Mexico in 1824. A physician turned politician and diplomat, he had spent time in the United States when political unrest forced him out of Mexico in the early 1830s. In response to President Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna's increasingly dictatorial rule over Mexico, he moved his family to Texas in 1835 and joined its movement for independence. Lorenzo de Zavala was a signer of the Texas Declaration of Independence, a drafter of the Constitution for the Republic of Texas, the designer of the Republic of Texas flag, and the Republic of Texas's first vice president. Given her grandfather's role in the shaping of Texas, it's no wonder that Adina grew up to revere its history so much. In fact, she called herself a student and jealous lover of Texas history. It seems that she was devouring books on the subject as soon as she could read. In her later years, she would recall writing historical plays at a young age with one of her sisters. Her family lived in Galveston before they relocated to a ranch outside of San Antonio in the early 1870s. Adina attended the Ursuline Academy at Galveston until the move and was subsequently homeschooled. She enrolled at Sam Houston Normal Institute in Huntsville in 1879 and graduated in 1881 after completing her training to become a teacher. In addition, Adina attended a music school in Missouri. She taught elementary school in Terrell from 1884 to 1886, then settled in San Antonio. She would teach there until 1907, always placing a special emphasis on Texas history and heritage. In the late 1880s, Adina created the De Zavala Daughters organization with the goal of preserving and placing markers at sites of historical significance in Texas. A few years later, the De Zavala Daughters would become part of the Daughters of the Republic of Texas organization, also known as the DRT. Over the years, Adina and the women she worked with successfully pushed for the preservation of numerous sites in the state. But Adina is most famous for her efforts to save the long barracks at the San Antonio de Valero mission, more commonly known as the Alamo. By the early 1900s, the site of the Alamo was in decay. Pompeo Copini, the Italian-born sculptor whose Spirit of Sacrifice monument would later stand in front of the Alamo, recalled that Adina and his own wife Lizzie rode around town asking merchants to contribute bricks, wood, and other materials for the repair of the Alamo's buildings. The state of Texas had owned the Alamo's chapel since 1883, when it purchased the building from the Catholic Church, and had granted custody of it to the city of San Antonio. But the Hugo and Schmelzer Company, a wholesale grocery business, had owned the Long Barracks building, also known as the Alamo Mission Convent or the Monastery, since the mid-1880s. Adina had completed a great amount of research on this building and determined that it had been the site of more action during the siege and battle of the Alamo than other people realized. Concerned about the future of the building, she approached the owners of the Hugo and Schmelzer Company and got them to agree that if and when they decided to sell the property, her chapter of the DRT would be first in line to have a chance at purchasing it. In 1904, a fellow DRT member and very wealthy heiress named Clara Driscoll bought the property from Hugo and Schmelzer to ensure that it did not end up in the hands of some quote-unquote Eastern syndicate. To add some context, there had been rumors that the old barracks building was going to be demolished and that a new hotel was going to replace it. In 1905, Governor Samuel Willis Tucker Lanham signed legislation directing state funds to be allotted toward the preservation of the Alamo property. The state of Texas reimbursed Clara, and the governor transferred the Alamo property, the Mission Church as well as the barracks building, to the DRT. But Adina's troubles were far from over. In fact, some have called the new conflict that ensued the Second Battle of the Alamo. Members of the DRT quickly found themselves in disagreement over the historical significance of the barracks building and even when it was constructed. Clara Driscoll and her camp believed that the building had not existed at the time of the siege and battle at the Alamo, and that it would therefore be appropriate to tear down the long barracks and turn the site into a park. As I mentioned, Adina was determined to preserve the building because she was not only certain that it had existed during the events of 1836, but that it had been the scene of much of the fighting. It would later be proven that Adina was correct. While Adina had her own share of supporters from the DRT and the public at large, she was at the losing end of the battle by 1908. That was when she resorted to more drastic measures. Adina had heard talk that Clara Driscoll and her allies aimed to lease the Long Barracks site to a St. Louis-based syndicate, which planned to build either a hotel or an amusement park behind the Alamo and use the location of the barracks building as a front yard. On February 10th, Adina barricaded herself inside the building. She initially had 3 guards keeping watch outside of it, but agents from the syndicate threw them off the property. The agents didn't realize that Adina was inside the old barracks until she stepped outside to confront them. Next, law enforcement stepped in. The sheriff appeared on the grounds of the Alamo with an injunction. When Adina refused to take it and read it for herself, he attempted to read it to her. But Adina also refused to listen to it, sticking her fingers in her ears. Adina would later say, "There was nothing else for me to do but hold the fort. So I did." She stayed inside the rat-infested barracks for 3 days. In an attempt to get her to come out of the building quickly, law enforcement told the public not to bring her any food, although some people did bring her water, coffee, and extra clothing without facing any consequences. But she didn't budge until she was certain that the old fortress was safe from the developers' hands. Adina's victory proved to be a temporary one. In 1911, Governor Oscar Colquitt ordered the Long Barrack Fortress to be restored as closely as possible to its original appearance. Construction workers uncovered the building's foundation during this project, and experts were able to verify that Adina had been right in her belief that the barracks had been an original part of the Alamo. But in 1913, Lieutenant Governor William Mays ordered the second story of the Long Barracks to be demolished. He took this action while Governor Colquitt was attending to some out-of-state business. Adina's actions in February 1908 still earned the attention and admiration not only of Texans, but of Americans in general. The story of Adina De Zavala barricading herself in the Long Barracks spread across the country, eventually earning her the nickname Angel of the Alamo. Adina's work to preserve Texas history did not end after her stand at the Alamo. In fact, it was far from finished. She founded the Texas Historical and Landmarks Association in 1912, and the organization went on to place nearly 40 markers around the state. Adina launched a campaign to preserve historical sites from the time periods represented by the Six Flags of Texas. A notable site that was restored as a result of this campaign was the Spanish Governor's Palace in San Antonio. Another was the group of houses in San Antonio that had belonged to Jose Antonio Navarro, who, like her own grandfather, had signed the Texas Declaration of Independence. In the 1930s, Adina helped verify the locations of the first two Spanish missions in Texas, both of which were in the eastern part of the state. State leaders, along with the public, greatly valued Adina's knowledge and input on historical matters. Governor Pat Neff appointed her as a member of the Texas Historical Board. Additionally, she sat on the advisory board of the Texas Centennial Committee and served as a charter member of the Texas State Historical Association, later serving on its executive committee and being honored as a Life Fellow. We also cannot forget Adina's writings on the history of Texas. The first of these was a short educational play for her students titled The Six National Flags That Have Floated Over Texas. She also penned History and Legends of the Alamo and Other Missions in and around San Antonio, Legend of the First Christmas at the Alamo, or The Margel Vine, and In My Grandmother's Old Garden Where the Rose Reigned as Queen. Adina De Zavala died on March 1, 1955, at the age of 93. Her funeral was held at St. Joseph Church in San Antonio. Her casket was fittingly draped with a Texas flag, and her body was taken past the Alamo in a final tribute. She had donated most of her documents pertaining to the history of Texas and the history of her family to the University of Texas at Austin. Adina donated some additional documents to the University of the Incarnate Word in San Antonio, the same institution to which she willed her estate. Shortly after her death, the Texas legislature passed a concurrent resolution honoring Adina for her work in preserving and marking sites of historical importance in the state. The Daughters of the Republic of Texas have since placed commemorative markers at Adina's grave in St. Mary's Cemetery and at the Alamo. I will note that the DRT also placed a marker for Clara Driscoll at the Alamo. The Bexar County Historical Committee has paid tribute to Adina as well, honoring her legacy with a state historical marker on Alamo Plaza. So there you have it, the story of educator, preservationist, historian, and above all, dedicated Texan, Adina De Zavala. Thanks for listening, and until next time, y'all.